Hi, I've been using the latest Breathe app actually on the Apple phone, and it's actually quite a nice one because as some Vlad mentioned before, just before you go down here, it's got a tendency to get the heart going up. So I might just check what the heart rate was beforehand, but it's quite nice. I highly recommend it. You might hear a slight Swedish twang when I talk. When I grew up in Sweden, one julaftons morgon, as it's called, we always hoped that it was going to be snow in the morning. It was quite a magical time, and as soon as we kind of woke up in the mornings, we'll go downstairs and we'll look at a kind of a Christmas setup Dad has done, and then go under the kind of look at the trees and all the kind of Christmas gifts. And we always hoped for snow to arrive. In fact, this is actually what Christmas looked like a lot of the time back home in Sweden. And I remember one time when I was sat in the kitchen window looking out, and the few Christmases before, we'd had quite a lot of snow. But this morning we didn't have any snow, and I was really worried because I didn't understand how Santa was going to be able to come. And I wanted something very specific for Christmas because we were really, really into building Lego at that time. The snow didn't arrive by Santa, which ended up being our neighbor. He did actually arrive. And that Christmas morning, I got a set. It wasn't actually this one, but I got a set that you could build a multitude of things of. And it was really like winning the lottery. I was so, so excited. And as any kids will do, you start out actually building the whole Lego model thing, and then you get a little bit bored, or you've completed doing it, and then you let your imagination kind of run wild, and you build something completely different. And we had a lot of Lego in my family. Not every single year actually, every other year-ish, there was a new member to the family being added, and my teacher would kind of joke, not in a very nice way, and say that you soon got a football team in your family, when are your parents going to stop having kids? But they stopped at 5, but we had a lot of Lego, and we tried as much as we could to kind of keep a bit of an order and do a lot of when we kind of did our Legos and get along. And I've got this really strong memory that I can still to this day remember the feeling and the sound of going through our big Lego box and trying to find the specific pieces that we're looking for, just hand deep down and looking, trying to resemble, kind of remember what that kind of Lego piece will feel like, the size of it, and actually try to find it. And when you think about it, the people at Lego, they're insanely clever. You can build pretty much anything out of Lego. You've got some basic kind of building blocks, there's some color variants in there, but in essence, you can build pretty much everything. Even the impossible staircase, as up in there, and a Polaroid camera. Or actually the first car that runs on air, like this guy, a 20-year-old Raoul did. He built it, even with a little image of himself on it. And there's even been people building iPhones, not working iPhones, but still building iPhones with it. And the clever thing with Lego is that they've got these standard sets of building blocks that you can find in every single model, but it's only when you need to build something very specific that they've got very specific kind of Lego pieces. And that's really where my memory of kind of searching for those specific pieces and having my hand really, really deep down is really kind of coming from, trying to find those specific pieces that were few and kind of far between. That red box that we kept our Lego in when we were kids, it had a kind of top compartment. And I can't remember how many small little compartments was in that compartment, but something around kind of 6 or 9 little compartments. And we tried, I'm pretty sure I was one of them trying to lead this, to organize our pieces to make it easier and stop us from going kind of hands down and spilling out all of the Lego pieces in there. But obviously, with 4 younger siblings, we had our own ideas of what the important Lego pieces were and what Lego piece should live where. So in the end, we ended up having just pouring all of the Lego pieces out, and that way kind of going through and trying to find things. But even so, even if there sometimes was this big confusion when it came to actually finding specific Lego pieces, Lego is still absolutely fantastic, and it's got quite a lot of similarities with what we do, and that's pretty much what I'm going to be talking about today. But before we go into that, I think we're at the time that's super, super exciting right now. We've said, well, Vlad mentioned before that the internet is only just over kind of 10,000 days old. And I moved to the UK in 2006, and none of these devices existed back then, and none of the other kind of smartphone that came after that. And since then, we've had a multitude of new devices coming in, and we're right at the point where virtual reality and, of course, Pokemon Go and augmented reality is making a big shift, and this is the year that's set to kind of make that kind of go mainstream. And it's amazing, really, when you think about it. Even if it's in the first minute of the internet, so many things and so many different devices have come out, and so many new services have come out. Twitter, Uber, anything that means that we can, with the tap of a button, access information, get things delivered, and do the things that we want to do. This quote most of you have probably seen is that once in a while something revolutionary comes along that changes absolutely everything. It's from the introduction of the iPhone back in 2007. And there's no denying that the iPhone, it did absolutely change absolutely everything. But as with all things go when it comes to technology, we're now at a point again when everything is changing once more. Smart homes is the new smartphones, and we're at a point again where 2006 is meant to be a year to really kind of kick this off. There's a bit of debate about just how many Internet of Things devices we're actually going to be having. Cisco believes there's going to be 50 billion connected devices by 2020, and Gartner believes it's going to be 25 billion. But whatever the number is going to be, it's a lot more than what we have today. I think the number is somewhere around kind of 5 billion. And the really exciting thing is that not necessarily this, that we're going to have specific gloves that we're going to do stuff with, but the things that we've seen in movies like Minority Report, in various concept videos like in A Day of Glass, and in other movies again like in Her, where everything just works so seamlessly that we might even fall in love with technology. That's changing a lot for us at the moment. Whilst it's going to take some time before we actually get to a situation where everything is connecting and everything is working seamlessly, the thing that we need to make sure we can do is make sure that our content can go absolutely everywhere because it's going to go, or anywhere because it's going to go absolutely everywhere. This, some of you might have seen this is by a former engineer from Google called Max Brown, and he wrote a Medium post at the end of, or the beginning of last year, I believe it was, called "My Bathroom Mirror is Smarter Than Yours." And this is again something that we've seen in concept videos like A Day of Glass and so forth, where individual kind of pieces of content are flowing onto different kind of surfaces. The guy who was part of working up the interface for Minority Report, John Underkoffler, he's got this vision where nothing is bound by the physical size and shape of a device, or pixel as he calls them, but things can just flow on from one device to another. And that's kind of what we're starting to see, not necessarily being a reality just yet, but this is a circuit bracelet from 2014, where they had this vision that actually small devices, because we can't interact with them in a very kind of engaging way, we need other ways of actually displaying information, displaying the apps that we interact with. So whether that's something that's actually displaying onto our skin, or something like this one, which is DuoSkin, that came out just earlier this kind of summer, a concept from MIT, where you, with the use of a temporary tattoo, can actually control things and do certain things. And this is quite revolutionary. It can kind of multiply where and how we actually interact with different things. There's an article called The End of Apps as We Know It that was written a while back. And in the article, the author is talking about how this whole idea and how we're using apps at the moment, where everything is something we tap and we open it up. And actually for websites as well, there's a specific destination we go to, open it up, and then we're served with just that kind of content. That's kind of changing, and the way the future is going to be is something where things are being pulled in. We talked yesterday about kind of building websites with API calls and dynamic kind of feeding in kind of content. And this article talks a lot about how in the future it's going to be, apps is going to be much more like a publishing tools. Websites are going to be much more like a publishing tools. We'll have certain kind of templates for different things, like cards that you see in Google Now and so forth. And that's how we're going to interact with content, and we can increasingly ourselves define what cards we actually want to see. And this card-based approach and the fact that we aren't so reliant on apps anymore, that's one of the main ideas behind iOS that's just come out as well. It's one of the main features that rather than actually open something up, you can interact with it then and there and get these kind of glances and snippets of things, and that's how you can interact with stuff. Websites and apps, however, though, they aren't going anywhere for the foreseeable future, except, of course, for absolutely everywhere. Right now, there's around 4.8 billion connected devices on Earth. I believe somewhere around 1.2 billion is where, or 7. That number can't be correct, actually. I'll find the correct number, that one. Somewhere around 7.2 billion, the number of mobile connected devices passed the number of people on Earth, so that number is definitely not correct. For every single human being that enters into the world right now, 5 mobile devices are created as well. And there's just a huge, huge number of devices out there. OpenSignal have done these visualizations the last few years. I haven't been able to find the last one, but when the first one they did in 2012, there was just under 4,000 unique Android devices downloading their apps. And last year that number, I believe, was just under, or just over 24,000. So there's an enormous amount of devices out there that we need to make sure that our content can go on right now, even if we're not right there at the future where it goes on to various different surfaces, including our skin. And for us as kind of working in web, what this means is that that big kind of reveal that we used to do just a few years ago, going, ta-da, this is what your website is going to look like in different browsers. There's one view and it's going to be the same, roughly across all the different browsers. It doesn't exist anymore. Anything that exists right now it depends on it. It depends on the screen size. It depends on so many different kind of things. And to some extent, it kind of sucks because it makes our job a lot harder, but it's also really, really amazing. It means that what we actually design, what we build can be experienced absolutely everywhere, from the most remote places on Earth until also the most kind of private places on Earth as well. I actually worked with Randy when he got his iPad. It's fake, by the way, but still. And it's, even if that's a little bit kind of nicer to think about in terms of what we can do for the world and how we can connect people and where we can go online, this is the reality as well, that increasingly we want to be able to go online wherever we want to be able to go online, and it doesn't really matter where it is. And as a starting point, this means that we're increasingly talking about that any device, any browser, any screen, any input method, any connection speed, anything can be used absolutely anywhere and at any time. We talked before about accessibility and making sure that the kind of most common denominator should be the starting point, that anyone can actually access everything. And Vlad mentioned before that one of the kind of founding principles behind the internet was that anyone could actually access it. And that's the kind of core building block behind the device-agnostic design, that the device you're using is not necessarily dependent on knowing what device is going to be displayed or the content is going to be actually displayed on. When I first started working agency side, I'd spent quite some time working on form designs, working amongst others with HMRC. And when I work with HMRC and doing kind of form designs, we had to build and we had to design and define every single page that we were working on, because they had different form fields, they had different things on them. So when I moved over agency side and we started, or my boss was kind of talking to me about, well, we don't need to do wireframes for absolutely everything, just the kind of key pages. I'm like, what on earth is he talking about? Of course we need to do a wireframe for every single page. Otherwise, how are we going to know what content should go where, what the functionality should be, all of the interactions? I learned quite quickly and realized that wasn't really a sustainable method of doing things. In 2011, it must have been, I had the privilege of working on BBC Olympics. And it was the biggest undertaking the BBC had done. We were designing pages for every single athlete, every single country, every single venue, every single sport and event in those venues or in those sports as well. BBC had just rolled out the new design of BBC Sport, and we're just about to do that, and we had to work within the parameters and the kind of predefined templates for BBC Sport. But also we had to make sure that the kind of template that we designed for athletes, which is one of the streams I was working on, it had to work for someone like Usain Bolt, but also someone completely unknown. And that was a massive undertaking. We had kind of core building blocks with the left-hand kind of side, the middle column, and then the kind of right-hand column as well. And we had to work out and make sure that this could work even if the athlete in question didn't have a single news story written about them. Well, then we could say, okay, we could feature news stories about the country, or maybe the sport in general, or the event in general. But what if that person or the athlete didn't actually have any news stories written about the country either? Then what should we do? And all these little things, all these little scenarios, we had to define all of them and figure out what could actually work. How would we actually display the content on them? And what would we do if someone had won medals previously and they were likely to win medals again at the London Olympics versus if they hadn't? And what about someone like Usain Bolt or Britta Steffen in this case, where we might want to display some infographics or some stats around them? And for some people, it might be nothing at all. So maybe for some people, that whole screen, there might only be one or two things here, but nothing else. And we had to make sure what that column there and that one should also work, and make sure that the page wasn't too kind of disjointed up. And the way this was possible in doing it was breaking everything down into modules and having page templates for each of the kind of core pages that we were building, and then using dynamic publishing, setting rules and saying, well, if the athlete is someone like Usain Bolt who's won medals previously, then do this. If it's this, do that. And that way, that was the only way that we could actually automatically pull everything together and make sure that every single athlete that took part in the London 2012 Olympics had a page for them. Every venue, every country, every single sport. It was absolutely fascinating, and a kind of approach, even if it wasn't kind of responsive or anything, that we can use for today as well. In reality, all of this is actually a little bit like building Lego. It's by starting on the kind of least common denominator, what's the least amount of content we're going to have, and how can we build it up into something that's bigger? From a kind of a small castle to a big castle, a little person to kind of a fully grown Lego person. And this modular kind of design that we've done is something that we've done for a very long time. This is a cathedral in my hometown, which I believe is kind of coming up to being 900 years old right about now. And every single thing in our world, every single thing in here as well, it's a module. It's kind of different modules kind of put together in a different kind of way. So modular design is not anything that's kind of new. We've done it for a long time. This is the Sony Ericsson, or now Sony Mobile's former headquarters, which is about in my hometown as well, just 15 minutes from where I grew up. And in 2009, I believe, we started working with Sony Ericsson and redesigned the homepage, or the whole website. There were a number of other agencies working on different parts of the sites, and as the kind of years went past, we had campaign sites that were being done and other agencies working on those as well. But there was no common language between all of this. Internally, we didn't have a set of specific templates that we would use, specific modules that we would use, and we definitely didn't have anything that we shared with the other agencies. So internally, we started coming up with a system and saying, okay, well, if we're going to do a beloved carousel or a featured piece of content, this is the kind of module template that we're going to be using. And then increasingly, just before I left the company, was working on developing a pattern library. So it was something that we could actually share across agencies and across projects to make sure that the time it took to do something was minimized, but also, even more importantly, for the user, things worked in the same way. Because for the user, it wasn't a difference between if they want a homepage on sonyericsson.com or campaign section of the site for a specific kind of phone. And this is really where the magic and the value of doing modular design comes in. When you start to really break down your core building points or blocks, and you look at modules and content specifically, you have the ability of doing something magical, like pressing a button and then blop, all of the pages of the BBC are populated with content. Not really just a blop, but in essence, it kind of feeds in automatically. But it also serves as that kind of stop. Let's hang on, take a step back and actually see what we're doing here. Because if you end up having too many different modules, you end up in this kind of situation again, where you might have one or two kind of people being excited about all these different modules they've done, and they look amazing. And have you seen how the interaction and the animation works on this one? And what about this one? But the majority of people are going to be kind of pulling their hair, because all of these little things needs to be designed, and they need to be defined, and they need to be built. And the more time we spend doing that, the more time, or the less time we've got to do something else. There's a great post from this summer, I believe, from Spotify, one of the designers working for Spotify, and how when he started working for Spotify, he noticed some inconsistencies between things. And then gradually Spotify took it upon themselves to actually develop a design language, which is very much a similar thing, because it starts with a little thing like, oh, well, that module is slightly different, but that's okay, it's just in one place. But then that grows and grows and grows, and eventually you have this big, big mess. Pretty much this again, where everything just looks different, and it makes things a headache for the internal team, because you have no idea what this thing is actually supposed to look like, how it's supposed to work, because there's a different way over there. You might actually have internal arguments around the whole thing, and there's no kind of consistency for the user either. So having a modular approach and going through things and defining kind of patterns and templates for modules, it can go a long way on making sure that you don't have a massive mess to clean up in the end. And for as long as we've done web design, and for as long as we've done any kind of print design and graphic design, as we saw in the video before as well, we've been working with various forms of kind of grids and various forms of kind of building blocks to make it easy for us. We've worked with things that make sense. There's a reason why that headline there doesn't go all the way across, and why the kind of columns are divided up in certain lengths of columns as well, is to make it easier to read, make it easier to scan, as Eva-Lotta was talking about just before as well. When the web, if you take it in its most purest form, it's absolutely fluid. There's nothing kind of controlling it. It just goes in and out in terms of content width. What we've tried to do for a long time is making sure that things are fixed. We had the kind of 960, 1024 that we worked with for a long period of time, in saying, this is what the content is going to look like, to help make sure it looks the same across as many devices as possible. When we started doing responsive design, we set breakpoints based on the most common device sizes, and then we added some kind of smaller breakpoints to make sure that we did kind of content tweaks if typography didn't really work, or if images didn't really work. And then we added even more kind of breakpoints to make sure if we had a specific device that wanted to do something for, maybe there was a rotation of it as well. What we're moving towards now, we're kind of increasingly responsive design and also going device agnostic, is making sure that things are as fluid as possible, making sure that it can adapt automatically and scale in and out to as many devices as possible, like we saw on the kind of open signal visualization before. But of course, we're not doing things at random. We do need rules, and we need to have things that kind of guide and set rules for how things are actually going to be displayed. And I love this quote by Trent Walton, where he talks about that kind of this dance of things, of content as being content choreography, and how we need to make sure that the intended message we had is preserved on any device and any width, making sure that if you go from a big screen to a small screen, the way content reflows into new layout, it still makes sense. It still tells the same story that we want to tell. And to really be able to do this, or actually realizing how we can do this, we need to look at the content. We need to understand what our different building blocks is. And this is where we come back to Lego again. So just in a model I got for that Christmas when the snow didn't arrive, and you could build multiple things out of it. When you think about kind of responsive design, and you think about Lego, you can build big things and you can build small things. And we need to have an idea of what those big and small things are across the different kind of situations we're going to be in. And the first point to that really starts with defining, okay, what are our main kind of views and templates? Not every single page, as I naively thought at one point that you should do. And then little by little, once we defined, okay, these are the main pages we have, the main views we have, we can start to play around with the layout and break down. How does this actually work? Roughly the content hierarchy, how will it actually work? And at the same time, we try to do it simultaneously for a larger device and a smaller device, whether we start small and go big or vice versa in terms of our sketching process, it doesn't really matter. But the key thing is that we've started defining our modules and we know what the order of priority is. We know the order, the content stacking strategy, the content choreography across different devices. And then we break down things into even smaller elements, even smaller kind of modules, until we eventually have something that we can define and say, well, this is how this is going to work on a large device and a small device, and we can take those modules out and kind of add them to our pattern library and continue going through and doing that and say, well, this is what the product module is going to look like on a larger device and on a smaller device. But then actually looking within the modules as well and seeing that we have a template for the modules as well. This is what an individual kind of product is actually going to look like on a large device or on a small device. And as we do that and we work through our main kind of templates, it's trying to actually fill in all of these little Lego pieces into our main templates and see how do they actually fit together. So we've got the product module, and that's going to look roughly like that one we saw before. And we can also see that actually that one sits over there on the product page as well. And it's got the same kind of layout, 4 products in the same kind of row. And then little by little, you can go through everything and gradually, automatically almost, we saw it yesterday in Mika's talk, how all of a sudden you don't actually have that much to build. There's not that much complexity. You can reuse things as much as possible, and little by little you have this massive module library where you've defined how everything kind of works instead of doing it on a page level. And that becomes an invaluable resource, whether you just do it from a UX point of view and do annotations, or you do it with kind of design and code added to it as well. But it makes things so much easier and so much quicker and so much easier to actually automatically pull things together. And this is again when it kind of comes back to Lego, making sure that the modules that we define for our library, they are the core kind of building blocks, and then we only use the small specific modules when we actually kind of need them. And the key really to making all of this happen, Vlad again, there's a lot of mention of Vlad now, but was talking about how only a small percentage actually know how we can make the magic happen online. And the key for us to make sure that we can build things that can go on as many devices as possible is making sure we work together across disciplines. A lot of the time when I'm running workshops for designing for multiple devices, people ask me, well, how many versions, how many wireframes versions should I do? Do I need to do every single kind of device size and every single orientation? And do I need to do them high fidelity? And what about the prototype? And in the end, depending on your team, you might not need to do any wireframes at all. It might be enough with a sketch and working with visual designer, developer, who at the same time can start to build things in the browser, and that's the way you kind of build it out. So the key really is to try to think about device-agnostic design and modular design as something which is much more like Lego, where you have predefined rules, you have predefined kind of building blocks, not a million bazillion pieces like you do in a puzzle where every single one is unique. And in reality, it's about going back to basics and looking at those natural kind of breakpoints, looking at what makes sense for the content, trying to move away from specific devices as much as possible when it comes to breakpoints. But as Brad Foster is kind of talking about, small, medium, and large, and where if you start taking your designs into the browser and you see there's something, it doesn't look good anymore, it breaks, well, that's probably a point for a breaking point, and then you work your way upwards or work your way kind of downwards. What responsive design has really kind of taught us is the fact that we can adapt the views, the content that we're actually displaying onto different devices, making sure it can reflow in different kind of ways. And device-agnostic design is based on that any device should be your starting point. But of course, as we know, not all devices are created equal. There are certain things that certain devices are great for. Desktop and tablets and iPhones or smartphones are great for doing kind of quite in-depth tasks, doing research, looking things up, looking at maps and so forth. But they're not very great for, specifically not the desktop, and not very great for being notified that you're supposed to take a left because that's the kind of next stop on your journey, or getting too many kind of notifications on. the smartwatch is terrible for kind of doing something in a very long period of time. You'll get incredible kind of neck pain. It's too fiddly and it just doesn't really work. So as much as any device should be a starting point, it's also kind of acknowledging the fact that devices are different and they each have a role in and of themselves. And increasingly, there's going to be more and more devices being added onto this, looking at how input is going to affect what we do as well, and making sure that it can go on as many kind of screens as possible. One of the exercises I tend to do when I talk about trying to do device-agnostic design is actually taking 2 pieces of paper and just ripping them up. If you take one piece and you have it in landscape, you rip it in the middle, and then you take one of those pieces, rip that one in apart, and then you repeat it until you have 5 individual kind of pieces. If you think about these individual pieces of paper as your device, as your screen, and try to do any kind of sketch that you've done for a homepage, for example, or a product page, and transform it onto all of those different kind of paper sizes, you automatically and really, really quickly, in about 10-15 minutes, you get a sense of how the content and the layout is going to adapt across different kind of screen devices or screens. And it also forces you to not think too much about the device. You can't really not think about that small piece of device is probably some kind of smartphone, and the smallest one is probably some kind of a smart watch. But it's a good starting point for not thinking too much about a specific iPhone or specific Samsung or HTC kind of phone, but think more about the natural flow of content and what the actual size of the screen itself will determine. So in summary, any kind of device should be the starting point. And try to define your key pages and your views when you do device-agnostic design, and you try to build out systems that can go absolutely anywhere. And then approach it like Lego, not a puzzle with every single piece is kind of different. And use sketching as much as possible. It can save so much time and get you to work through so many pages in no time at all. And then kind of collaborate across disciplines. And also keep in mind that this, whether we like it or not, this is the future. Increasingly, more and more people are going to be able to go online in distant places on Earth and in more ways than we've ever wanted it before. But even if Randy sitting on the toilet is not necessarily the future, the point of that one is that users and us increasingly want to determine how we experience certain things, what we get notified of as we have progressive web apps and as more things are kind of possible. And for us as designers, it's really about finding that kind of sweet spot between sitting somewhere like this and technology is just doing everything for us, because I don't believe that's the way we're kind of moving. But it's finding a sweet spot between that, where we can take a step back and actually do more kind of good things, and this, where we're just stuck in situations that we know we shouldn't really be here, but yeah, again, we kind of, because the timings and budgets and this and that, we kind of ended up going down a road where we do little bespoke things. And I'm one of the, it's called obota optimist in Swedish, which is incurable optimist, I guess. I believe, we talked about it a little bit yesterday at dinner, and I believe there's so much potential in where we are at the moment. There's so many fantastic things that are about to happen in terms of how we go online and how much we can actually do things, and making sure that we get relevant content to it as well. And even if systems like the grid and so forth is not necessarily the future is going to take away our jobs, what we do and how we do it is going to change. And where modular design and thinking about device-agnostic designs and kind of device-agnostic UX systems can really help us is in making sure that rather than spend loads of time doing those nitty-gritty variations and building lots of little different things that takes time and budget and needs to be amended and changed across different versions when client feedback comes back, we have time to actually do the really amazing things and actually focus on the things that are going to make a difference to the experience, to do actually even more good stuff and make sure that we don't take a one-size-fits-all when it comes to how we do notifications and how we deliver content, but actually look at where in the journey is the user and what do they actually benefit from the most at the moment. Because we all know how frustrating it is when technology doesn't work or when technology is pestering us and is taking us away from what we do. And I actually think that the more we can use and think about what we're building as these kind of modular things that can automatically kind of pull in, and we think about stuff in a clever way, the happier we are going to be, the more things we can make happen for our users, and the more we can make more things happen for our users, the happier they will be. And I do actually think that can help make the world a little bit of a better place. So it's our kind of responsibility to, in the words of Wilson Miner, make sure that, you know, we're not just the designers, we're the builders. What do we want the futures to actually feel like, and what do we want everything that we kind of do to actually be able to accomplish for us and for the people we're designing for? Thank you very much.